I was going to start this morning with a comment about February being our bleakest month, but I think that's a little hard to believe today. Every February is the month that we celebrate sharing our faith and our national organization, the Canadian Unitarian Council. And so it's a good reminder that when we light our chalice across the country, from time zone to time zone, chalices are being set ablaze as UUs gather in worship. And this morning I want to speak about how the ways Canadian Unitarian Council has worked over the past 50 years to help us be a welcoming denomination. We as Canadian UUs have sought to draw the circle ever wider, to reach out to those shunned by other religions and let them know that this is a community of openness. From the lay chaplaincy program to being advocates for the marriage of same-sex couples to supporting dying with dignity, we can be proud of our heritage of widening the circle. At the same time, we struggle with being a very small denomination with serious limitations in our capacity to widen the circle. Now, we've always been a tiny religion, a hummingbird in contrast to those great whales of Christianity and Islam. In Mississauga currently there are at least 80,000 Muslims, 300,000 Christians of all denominations live here. There are 141 Unitarians. So we are the hummingbirds, tiny and beautiful and active. Hard to see, yet we make far more of a difference than we often realize. We lead the way in many ways on social liberation, often decades ahead of the curve. A tiny bright bird leading the way. Back in the 1970s, there were very few Unitarian ministers in Canada, which meant that Unitarians outside of major cities who wanted to marry within our tradition could not. And so the Canadian Unitarian Council created the lay chaplaincy program, and this training program allowed the small fellowships to have a person they could call on to offer wedding and funeral services to members. Over the years, the lay chaplaincy program has evolved into an outreach activity, and lay chaplains now offer their services to the larger community. And long before the marriage of same-sex couples became legally recognized, ministers and lay chaplains would perform services of union, honoring the love and commitment of all people. These days, with the province of Ontario opening up marriage licenses to a wide variety of officiants, our lay chaplains no longer have sort of a particular niche in our wedding market. But we can consider ourselves partly responsible for that trend. We set the stage for meaningful weddings to take place outside of traditional church settings. Decades ago, we saw that people wanted to marry in their homes, in parks, and at cottages, and we widened the circle of choice. And now that weddings are opening up, our lay chaplains are turning to the funeral industry. It's clear that traditional services and burial practices don't meet the needs of many people. Something like 100,000 Ontario people do not have funerals anymore because they can't make a connection with our funeral industry. So this fall, our lay chaplaincy committee is organizing a natural death expo to bring together ecological and ritual alternatives for people who are seeking more meaningful rites. And so we continue to widen the circle. Canadian Unitarian Universalists were at the forefront of the fight for marriage equality back in the early 2000s. Our executive director of the time, Mary Bennett, and various ministers spoke at federal legislative hearings in support of marriage equality. Youth from our Calgary congregation created the longest rainbow banner in Canada and took it to Parliament Hill. Over 500 feet long, portions of it have appeared at pride parades across the country. And if you attend an annual general meeting, you've no doubt seen it on the walls. Most recently, we supported the efforts of Dying with Dignity, the advocacy group for choice in dying, including physician-assisted death. Our executive director today, Vida Ning, made submissions to the federal panel last year about the need for new legislation, and congregations across the country have held workshops about end-of-life choices and raised awareness. We make a difference. Our spiritual community has helped pave the way, and we did it together. Congregations across the country make it clear that our religious faith stands on the side of love. We're often to be found at the forefront of progressive social thought, tugging at the circle, enlarging it, bringing in more people a little bit at the time. A busy little hummingbird. And our national body, the Canadian Unitarian Council, has helped us in this since 1961. Today, the CUC is our national denominational organization, and it's independent now of the much larger Unitarian Universalist Association in the States. And we have a small staff and a board of trustees, of which I currently serve. Now, we take pride on being a religious tradition that honors the self-governance of its communities, and democracy is one of our core principles. And indeed, the CUC itself is a democratic organization. We send delegates to our annual meeting and they vote on the issues coming forth. And with the exception of Transylvania, which is the birthplace of Unitarianism, we don't have any bishops. So we don't have a theological authority because we trust that in conversation together, our theology will be revealed. And yet, even amidst all that democracy, if we are to grow and thrive and know one another, if we are to work at enlarging the circle, we need that central body to keep us connected. We are all, in very real and meaningful ways, the Canadian Unitarian Council. The Council is comprised of its member congregations, that is to say us and Don Heights and First Toronto and the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Halifax and the Vancouver Unitarian Church and all the rest of our congregations across the country. And the Council exists because we are stronger together than apart. You might know of that old trick with the now obsolete phone book. It was always easy to tear one page. You might even be able to tear 5 or 7 of those thin newsprint pieces. But you could never tear the whole thing. You just can't do it because we are stronger together. And so this community supports that larger whole through an annual financial contribution that's part of our operating budget. We contribute because council staff help congregations figure out what they need and how to find it. And Linda Thompson, our congregational development staff, was just with the board last week to help us develop a strategic plan. We contribute to the CUC because the Council keeps us connected across the country through e-news, online webinars, regional gatherings, and annual meetings. And we contribute because the Council speaks for Canadian Unitarian Universalists on the national and international stages, promoting essential human rights and speaking against injustice in its many forms. We contribute because the Canadian Unitarian Council is helping us, as well as congregations across the country, support Syrian refugees as a sponsorship agreement holder. And finally, we contribute because the Council holds the larger vision of what it means to be Unitarian Universalists in Canada. Now, this past January, we affirmed a new mission to deepen our spirits, to nurture community, to act for an equitable, sustainable world. Deepen, nurture, act. It's our DNA. And in April, our delegates to the CUC's annual meeting in Vancouver will vote on a new vision for Canadian Unitarian Universalism. You may have seen it in our Shining Chalice, the weekly electronic announcements on Fridays. And this proposed new vision, brought together after about 3 years of consultation and reflection, is this. We seek a world in which our interdependence calls us to love and justice. As Canadian Unitarian Universalists, we envision a world in which our interdependence calls us to love and justice. This vision lights a path to the future, shining its light towards a world we want, a world we can help create, that we can imagine into being. The Reverend James Ishmael Ford says, "We are completely woven out of each other and the cosmos itself." And so we can participate in that challenging and worthy task of creating a society that reflects that deep knowledge of connection, of belonging to the earth. And we can work together as individuals, as communities, as a denomination reaching out to others to create a society of mutual relatedness, one that calls each of us to a path of love and justice. Reverend Kathleen McTeague calls love a force that has moved our human world towards goodness for thousands of years. And pagan activist Starhawk says that when a system is whole and healthy, when it is based on relationships of interdependence and cooperation that further resilience, diversity, abundance, sustainability, creativity, and freedom, it exhibits what humans call justice. And we, as people of the chalice, are called to live this love and this justice. We envision a world in which our interdependence calls us to love and justice. This is the society we seek. And it's the work we've been doing since 1961 when the Canadian Unitarian Council came into being. And it won't be easy. Religions are dying as a source of influence and meaning in people's lives. People are finding community and spirituality online, in pubs, pretty much anywhere except in a church. All the Christian denominations are shrinking in Canada, and we are too. Always small, we are now less than 4,000 people in a country of 35 million. And that means our task is really twofold: to continue our path to a world of true interdependence based on cooperation and sustainability, but also to let people know about us. If we don't, there may not be anyone to carry the chalice in 20 years. We must widen our own circles through sharing the meaning we find here. Our way of being in the world matters. A society of interdependence is needed sooner than later in the face of climate change. A society nourished by love, not hate, is desperately needed in the face of the Republican presidential nomination race. Our way of being is one worth talking about, worth sharing. There are more than 141 Unitarians in Mississauga. We just have to reach out and invite them in. As people of the chalice, may we be loud and proud. May we continue to be that brave hummingbird flying into the future, opening the circle ever wider. The world needs more hummingbirds. So say we all.